video cameras on private property.
Mr Chair.
Rohira Katani.
Thank you, Mr Chair. In speaking to this bill, I want to first acknowledge the incredible act of democracy demonstrated by the fact of 438 submissions being received in the space of 24 hours. This bill was referred to the Justice and Electoral Select Committee last Tuesday, 27th of September, and a day later, submissions closed. Our appreciation as a House must be expressed to those ordinary New Zealanders who made considerable efforts to provide comments despite the difficulties associated with rushed legislation. A common theme throughout many of the submissions was to draw on the advice and counsel of Dean McKnight, who suggested that claims about the implications about the rulings on other cases are overstated. Mr Knight's view is that while the government claims there may be about 40 current cases which will be prejudiced by the ruling, the Supreme Court's decision is relatively nuanced and will allow for the admission of the unlawfully obtained evidence in serious cases. In the purposes section, expressed in Clause 3 of this bill, we read that the legislation is required to provide a temporary period that will enable Parliament to address the matters raised in the decision regarding the lawful and appropriate use of video camera surveillance as part of law enforcement. And although the bill itself doesn't mention the current cases, the threat of these cases certainly looms large through the framework of the bill. I want to bring to the House the expert view of Barrister Tawaki Baranawhiake, who urged the Parliament to consider that the voice of reason must resound. In his email, he made some extremely salient points which I wish to lay on the floor for further debate, and I quote, "The presumption of innocence must remain for those who are entitled to it, and it is not for the police and politicians alone, without the independence of the judiciary overseeing the process, to merely deem that 40 cases before the courts and 50 current investigations are justified in having law-breaking surveillance. The law should be certain, and the police should get it right when they exercise the powers we the electorate give them." Unquote. I think these points are really critical, and I am in full agreement with Mr Awhiake that injustice is the price of making laws which break laws. And I remind the House of some statements made earlier in the debates this week around public confidence and trust in the police. If 2 out of 3 victims won't go to the police, then surely we have a problem. And I return again to the words of Mr Awhiake to place on record another interpretation which might fit within the purpose statement of this bill. Police powers should be used for serious crimes, nasty, evil, violent acts, dealers, real gangs, robbers, murderers and rapists, not for stifling political dissent by Māori political activists, greenies, animal rights people and the like. Mr Chair, the law already has safeguards which the operation and Supreme Court judgment demonstrates. Mr Key, in his initial comments on this new law, made the broad claim that if they couldn't get the numbers, that would mean there would be some serious criminals who would not be brought to justice. And I think it's really disturbing to note that the initial thought wasn't about developing a workable solution to a problem, but more akin to a crude ultimatum. All other parties would have to support ramming through the legislation, or they'd be soft on crime. And I have to conclude that this legislation is politicking by both National and Labour to create a perception for voters that they are actually acting in the interests of the electorate by putting up this legislation. The Māori Party says that is absolutely, blatantly untrue, and we continue to oppose this bill in every step that we can.
Call Keith Locke.
Thank you, Mr Chair.